about what excellent professors these readers must make as you listen to their words. And, we're going to be around at ACC. You can take classes from us. Our next readers, John Herndon, his bio here is rather modest, so I'm going to add to it a little tiny bit. It says here, John Herndon is a poet, novelist, and screenwriter. He has published 7 books of poetry, 2 are back there. And his first novel, One Too Many, also back there, was published in 2016. He teaches writing and literature at Austin Community College. Now, what we also need to know is that a couple weeks ago, John was in Berlin, where he's part of the film Frame Switch. He's the writer for that. He was nominated for an award, and the director of Frame Switch won New Director Award?
Talented new director.
Talented new director. This is in Berlin, folks. And you can watch Frame Switch on Amazon Prime. And Thanksgiving, John is going to Milan for another film festival where he's up for prizes. So I think that's worth noting. John Herndon.
Thank you.
It's Milan, Italy.
Oh, yeah, there is Milan, Texas. I was kind of surprised to see my book, Poems from Undertown, here. I had forgotten, I guess, that I had it here. And frankly, I think that this may be the last commercially available copy of Poems from Undertown. I think that upon sale, this will become, this book will become out of print. And so I decided to pick it up and borrow it from my friends at Malvern. And thank you again to Malvern for doing this, and to Joe for setting it up, and for all of you coming out. And so I thought I would just read a little poem out of this book. It actually came out in, let me be sure, 1990. And this is an explanation to Thomas, and Thomas is my son, who is now an assistant professor of economics at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. But at this time, he was a 3-year-old kid, or maybe a little bit older, when I wrote this poem. Explanation to Thomas. The grass is all alive, but we don't understand the language of grass. Once we knew the language, but now have forgotten. Sometimes, if you listen carefully, you can get the gist of the conversation. It can be attained occasionally and for brief moments, leaving behind sweet dregs. Follows a continual falling away. And it kind of disturbed me when I found that poem, because then I realized that I'm just still writing about the same old. I'll say stuff. So here's a recent poem. I went for a walk and brought home a poem. So there I was again, prowling the waste lots. Instead of working, I was working out, i.e. wandering around the neighborhood. Along the railroad right-of-way, I found native grasses drying in the sun, seed heads ripe and ready for the gathering, some kind of grama grass, side oats or blue, and purple threon and little blue stem. I brought a bag to carry all this home with seeds of flowers whose names are impolite, less than politically correct, oh well. Meskin hat and Indian blanket are nevertheless innocent and beautiful. I pray they sprout and root and bloom and seed my prairie restoration project, what some will call the weeds in my front yard. And then, of course, still writing about grass. Here's mowing at my age. How many times have I said never again? Who made me slave to the soil? Having read Thoreau and thought I understood, here I am behind this roaring machine, composing my very own leaves of grass, epodes on my love and hate relationship with the large family, broadcast and widespread, comprising supportive rice and wheat and corn, also obnoxious Bermuda and Johnson. And John is known to be lax in these matters, but things have gone pretty far even for him. And then I'm put in mind of politics and of how implacable my hatred was for George W. Bush. And no matter how many paintings he makes of I find that I'm letting go of all that. In light of new developments. I thought George W. Bush made Richard Nixon look good. And now, well, I'll let you fill in the blanks. But I thought I would share this poem, Reflections on the Clockwork Universe and the Strict Linearity of Time. I often think back to that moment during George W. Bush's tenure as governor here, when he was running the hike and bike trail around Town Lake with his entourage and bodyguards, like I used to see him from time to time. That morning, under the Lamar Boulevard Bridge, one decisive instant, when a trailer load of lumber, broken concrete, and rebar hit a bump and jumped off and landed on the trail just a couple of yards from the running bush. I often think, if only. Futile hindsight, vain regret. If only Bush or that trailer full of trash had started out that morning 5 seconds earlier or later. Empty wishes, too late for hope. Tears, idle tears. What happened went on to happen. Smoking ruins, shattered corpses, looted treasure, that's history. And no enumeration of the dead can change the past, nor the future that flowed therefrom, that now is past as well. Some people have told me they hate that poem. I don't believe it. Not me, but I hate to wish death on anyone. But, it's all in retrospect. If he's not. Yeah, I was thinking of what to read from my novel, and it presents a surprising puzzle what to read from a novel to try to entice somebody to like it and maybe want it and read it further, and you only have a couple of minutes to read a couple of bits. So I'm going to make a radical decision here and read chapters 1 and 2, and they're short, so never fear. And this is called One Too Many, and it's kind of it's rather noir, I could say. I would describe it as a crime novel, a love story, and a psychological case study. So here we go. The nicest thing about Austin, Texas is the neighborhoods. I'll give a tip of the hat to Dunya for a little bit of setting here. No doubt you've heard Austin is a party town with all the music, food, and celebrities, 6th Street, South by Southwest, ACL Fest, Formula One, etc. And it's all true. But the best thing about Austin is the neighborhoods. And the best thing about the neighborhoods is they're so quiet. I lived in North Austin, just a couple of blocks from the demographic center of the entire metropolitan area. And sometimes it was so quiet that the cooing of the doves was the loudest sound. The dogs didn't bother to bark at the mailman. The cats spent most of their time sleeping. Austin grew up as a college town and had the shady, tree-lined streets that went with that heritage. My neighbors and I grew all kinds of pretty flowers. Many of us, faced with the ongoing drought, were moving away from traditional lawns that have to be watered and mowed toward serryscaping with native trees, grasses, cactus, and wildflowers. Since I worked hard, invested wisely, and got lucky, I was able to retire at 35. I quit the rat race and bought my house here, and bit by bit converted my lawn to buffalo grass, big and little blue stem, and eastern gamma grass. I had several patches of bluebonnets, Indian blanket, and Mexican hat. Trails of crushed granite wound among bunches of prickly pear and agave. So like I said, the best thing about Austin neighborhoods was they were so quiet. The only problem was, it was too damn quiet. Chapter 2. I was able to make my fortune and retire by working diligently at that most quintessential of American enterprises, armed robbery. Some will rob you with a 6-gun and some with a fountain pen, according to Woody Guthrie. And I'm here to guarantee you that the one with the pen will make a whole lot more money. I fell somewhere in between. Armed robbery, in particular bank robbery, is not especially complicated or strenuous. The most important personal quality called for is self-control. Most people simply aren't capable of the level of self-control required, or more people would take up robbery as a profession. I seem to have been born with a greater degree of self-control than the vast majority of people. At least, that's what they tell me. My father was a doctor in a small town. He did all right, but never made a lot of money. My mom was Catholic, so they had a lot of children. I was the last of 6, and there are 7 years and some months between me and my youngest sister. Growing up, I was like an only child. When I was in 1st grade, my sister was starting high school. 2 of my brothers were married and had kids of their own. I wonder if I may have gotten some of my self-assurance from my upbringing. I was always surrounded by adults, but they all say I was my own man from a very early age. I was never a mama's boy. I was always her little man. No one paid much attention to me. I was mostly left to my own devices. In high school, I learned the value of self-control. I was hanging out at a friend's house whose parents were out of town. This was back in Florida. There were kids all around the swimming pool and a fair amount of booze and smoke and a little blow. Everyone was pretty high. This other friend Jake and I and a couple of chicks wandered out onto the golf course and started making out on the 13th green. Suddenly this asshole Bennett from school showed up with his crew. He started giving Jake a bunch of shit about some bad coke he'd sold him, and the next thing he pulled out a piece and threw down on him all gangster style. The girls were screaming and the crew were cussing, but I was standing right there when he flashed that gun, and I just snatched it out of his hand and slapped him across the nose with the barrel. He gasped and dropped to his knees. He was crying like a little girl. Blood was running everywhere. Jake was standing there with his mouth hanging open. The crew started charging, but I waved that pistol at them, and they backed off fast. I told them to help Bennett up and to get the fuck out of there. When they were out of sight, I threw the gun into the canal, and we went back to the party like nothing had happened. I got laid that night. After that, Jake always took me along when he was doing deals and always cut me in. Word got around pretty fast. Nobody ever fucked with me. By the time I graduated high school, my parents were pretty well played out. They held on while I finished my degree in psychology, but then my dad died and my mom too pretty soon after that. They owned their own home and some stocks and all that, but they loved all their kids exactly the same amount, so they divided the assets 6 ways exactly. That left me with a little less than $25,000. I'm not saying it wasn't fair, but $25,000 was a far different matter to my brother the lawyer and my brother the doctor than it was to me. A lot of people disparage a liberal arts degree, but I learned a lot in my psychology courses about myself. I learned some of the sources of my self-control. I learned that I needed intellectual freedom and freedom of action. I could never work for a boss in an office. I needed something that would afford me a living and provide a challenge and stimulus, a little excitement. I knew I wasn't going to be counseling the mentally disturbed. I had another idea how I could put that psychology degree to work. Now, my father's people were pretty well behaved, pretty prim and proper. But on my mother's side, there was Uncle Bill, her half-brother or stepbrother or something. He wasn't a con man exactly, but he was a pretty sharp operator. And some of the corners he cut landed him in prison for a short stay a couple of times. While he was there, he made contacts. Uncle Bill had an image to maintain. He was always wooing wealthy widows or other investors, and he had to look the part. He wouldn't dirty his hands, but he knew people. So I told him I wanted to meet someone. He looked at me with a sort of half smile. "You sure you know what you're getting yourself into?" he said. "I want to make my own way. I just need a chance to get some experience." So he gave me a name, and I got my start. When the cops say that 95% of criminals are really, really dumb, they're right. Most don't have the IQ God gave a chicken. Many are downright despicable. No doubt the human race would be a lot better off if most of them were killed before they could reproduce. Then there's the other 5%. The criminal life actually draws more than its share of geniuses and near geniuses. I wouldn't claim to be either, but I've met a few. As I mentioned earlier, it doesn't take a genius to rob a bank. There are guys who prove that every day. Robbing the bank's the easy part. Most guys rob the bank and go straight to jail. To do it right, you have to be smart. The first thing you have to know is the right financial institution to rob. You can only get this information from a fence. Fences, of course, work both ways, buying stolen goods and setting up the robberies in advance. The fences are some of the most powerful, intelligent, and creative people in the industry. Some of them are legendary. Someone high up in the bank or wherever has to be in on the deal. That's the only way to get the information, and that's the fence's special talent, finding these guys. They way over-report the amount of cash they have on hand, of course. There's always ridiculous insurance, and someone at the insurance company has to be greased. This all takes weeks and even months to set up. You're a contractor, so you get your lead and you head to the location. I never took jobs in my home state, whatever that might be. I always moved around a lot. I always liked to drive, even better if the place was 2 to 3 states away. Say I was living in Denver and the gig was in Memphis. That was about perfect for me. I got to see this great country and get to know the deluded American sheeple who think themselves as gentle as lambs when they're really quite wolfish. I always drove a Toyota Camry, probably the most invisible car in America, 2 to 6 years old. I gave myself plenty of time. I never got in a hurry. I always took 4 or 5 identities along for emergencies. I'd get a nice hotel, hang out a few days, head down to Beale Street, say, or take a ride on a riverboat. The day of, I go to a busy mall near the Target. Maybe I'm wearing a particular hat or jacket. I park and go into the mall. Maybe I buy a hat or jacket. I wear the different hat or the different jacket, or maybe I take off the hat or jacket when I exit the mall on the far side. This is all for the camera's benefit. It hardly matters. I have white skin and blue eyes. No one ever suspects me of anything. I stroll into the parking lot and pick out a car. I try to find the most common kind of car. Chevy, Ford, stock, nothing fancy, usually white, silver, or gray. I have a handy-dandy electronic key that will unlock and start most late model vehicles. I steal the car. This takes 10 to 20 seconds. I drive to the location, I walk in, and I meet the bank officer, whoever. He calls scrutiny, and he calls security, and I disarm them. Everyone cooperates. That's company policy. I never take the money from the teller's tills. That's where they keep the die packs. I drive away slowly. I want them to see the car. I return the car to the mall as near as possible to where I stole it. The whole thing has taken less than 10 minutes, and usually the car hasn't even been missed. And if it has, do you know how many people lose their cars in parking lots every day? I head back to the hotel, have a couple of drinks from the minibar, and turn in early. I have a long drive ahead of me tomorrow. That's pretty much it. You get the fences 60 and keep your 40. You can do very well on any job that's worth setting up. The problem most guys run into is they like to live high. I've always had simple tastes. Never believed a man should be a slave to his passions. All things in moderation, nothing too much. I think I'm essentially an Epicurean. I believe that the highest good in life is pleasure.